function of literature. By studying literature written in English, one will increase one's vocabulary. And one's written and spoken English would what? Improve. Literature will help you to what? Increase your vocabulary. How to read and write well, how to speak well. By studying literature written in English, one will increase one's vocabulary. The ability for you to speak and write well with the help of what? Literature. It will help you to broaden your knowledge in what? In English language. Literature will help to what? Help you in your written and what? Spoken language. How to write and how to speak well. That's what we have in schools. For you to gain admission into university as an art student, you must what? Have good grade in literature. For those who want to study law and English, literature is very, very essential for those kind of people. So, literature generally, studying literature will help what? Writing your knowledge in spoken language and what? Written language in English language. It will help you to increase your vocabulary. So now we're going to talk about the oral literature. We're going to look at the oral literature and the written literature. Distinction between oral literature and written literature. Basically, oral literature started before the advent of what? Literary works. Before the advent of book culture. Oral literature was passed from generation to generation. The beginning of literature itself in all society began orally. In all society began orally. When we talk about orally, it means spoken form. Spoken form. That's what we mean by oral literature. It was in spoken form. The beginning of literature itself in all societies is basically oral, where people chant songs. For instance, during festivals, during traditional occasion, the songs used there were in form of what? Spoken form. Through this, those songs back then was passed from generation to generation through spoken form. For instance, a particular person will tell the story to his or her child. Then the person's child will also pass the story to the next generation. So that was everything about oral literature then. It deals with what? Spoken form. The beginning of literature itself in all societies is basically oral, where people chant songs, for instance, at a community gathering, maybe festival, burial ceremony, wedding ceremony. The songs that was used then is known as the what? Oral literature that was passed then. So now, social occasion or even at work, this is usually done in form of lyrical qualities. It deals with lyrical qualities. Oral literature, it's usually passed from generation to generation. I said, stories and folklores, they are usually preserved in the memory of people from generation to generation. When we are talking about folklores, we are talking about traditional stories. Tradition and the stories were passed to people from generation to another generation through what? Spoken form. It might be a tradition of a community. It has been passed from a generation to another generation. Through what? Spoken form. Oral literature deals with spoken form. Through the words of the mouth. It is passed from generation to generation. Stories were being told and were preserved. When we look at our society today, we have some what? Generational stories. We have some stories that we have been told by what? Our parents. I believe most of us, our parents, have told us some stories about the past. And now, if we can also what? Preserve the story by what? Transferring the story to the next generation. So the next generation will be aware of that particular tradition or stories. That is all about oral literature. Oral literature deals with what? Spoken form. And remember, spoken form means what? Words of the mouth. It has been passed from generation to generation. Through stories, through folklores. And folklores means what? Tradition and stories of a particular community. Every community has his or her own story. Every community has its story. So, passing of story from generation to another generation was oral literature then, without the advent. Before the advent of what? Book and culture. Before education came in. Before literary works were produced. For us to preserve it then, we started using what? Oral literature. Passing it from generation to another generation. So that is all about oral literature. Oral literature deals with what? Spoken form of words from generation to another generation. Stories, tradition were passed before the advent of book and culture.